At this time, we are going to cover Greek, medieval, and the types of stages, the theatron, the seeing place. After listening to the lecture, you should be able to understand our origins of Western theater and recognize the samenesses and the differences between ritual and theater. I'm only going to touch on those. I'm not going to say a lot, but I do want you to understand why it's so important. I know this is a repeat of some of the things I've already said, but sometimes these things bear repeating. Now, after you finish seeing this PowerPoint, you should be able to identify what an orchestra is, what a skene is, a paradoi, a Greek chorus, tropes, medieval stages, and Shakespearean Globe Theater. Now, I would also like you to be able to recognize the Globe Theater, what a proscenium stage looks like, what a thrust stage looks like, theater in the round, and an alley stage. Both ritual and theater deal with social relationships. They deal with it by the reenactment of living people. That's what makes it different than movies, and that sometimes is what attracts people more to theater, is because it is that realness. While you don't have the reality of what happens in the movies, you actually have those people there, and it's those actual actions that they make that really draw you into the stage. Now, theater confines itself to showing and saying things about relationships, and rituals do things that reinforce the culture, and they also make change happen. Give you an example of something that is reinforced. We have funerals for the dead. We have weddings. Those are ritual things that reinforce our culture. How do we want to bring about change? When you think about how we went from oral tradition to reading, that change started happening by the invention of the first alphabet by the Sumerians. And so in order to get that change to happen, which took over 200 years, by the way, people had to start doing rituals about what it would be like to read and how that would help change a society. That's the reason why both are so very important. The origins of theater really do contain these three things: enactment, imitation, and seasonal performances. Our seasonal performances of 4th of July in the United States, or Memorial Day, or Thanksgiving, those are very indicative of the United States. Also the imitation. But what it comes down to when you look at the theatrical space or the theater performance itself, even though I'm going to talk about all of these things that it takes to make theater production happen, you really only need two things to make a theater production happen. You need the performance space. Actually, it's three. You need the performance space, you need the audience, and you need the actor. Those are the only three things you need. You don't actually need lighting, you don't need sound, you don't need all of that spectacle stuff. Because really, if you don't have those three things, then you're not going to have a performance, whether it's a play or a movie. I'm going to repeat this, bears repeating again, because we in the Western civilization emanate from Greek theater, theater of Dionysus. The two performance spaces that are most important in Greek theater are orchestra, the dancing circle, or the skene, the back part where the scenery is. Now, this one is just entryway, so it's not a part of the performance space, but the paradoi, where the entrances are made, stage left and stage right. I want to talk about the 5 things that the Greek chorus really adds to a Greek production. They share the audience's reactions to events and characters. That is, they become a part of the audience, and then they turn around and they interact with the actors, where they actually become a part of the action in the stage. They also serve as the ideal spectator, giving specific commentary to help guide the audience with the little bit of knowledge that they have. They add spectacle and movement and dance and visual interest to the play. I know I said that Aristotle said that spectacle wasn't important, but when you are the person the farthest away, sometimes spectacle is all you have. But because everybody knew a lot of the plots, it's like going to see the same movie. You would go again and again and again, or you would even buy that movie because it offered you this kind of interest. Okay, the last thing they did is they were a bridge between the actors and the audience. So they did give that interpretation when possibly the audience could get lost. It's kind of like having a narrator in a theater production or in a movie. And you know, at first the church, as I said, did control all the drama outside of the church, and then it became controlled by secular groups because it really was too big for the church to keep putting on. The guilds or the fraternities took over it in some of the cities. And, for instance, the Bakers' Guild would control the play about the Last Supper. The Shipwrights' Guild would control the plays about Noah and the Ark. The church still had to approve the scripts, but even then its role was diminished. During the medieval time, there were two types of stages. One was a fixed stage, and there were two chief areas. There was the mansion stage, which was a platform that was built and set up outside the church, and then the plateau, which had wheels that sat right next to the mansion stage. It allowed for large spectators, and it allowed for the spectators to get closer. Now, during this time, what we would have is we had the keeper of the register, and this was a very important position because it had a lot of control, and this could decide which confraternity was going to do the play or not. In addition to that, you had the master of secrets who was in charge of the machines. Those are the ones that had the special effects, and often they were very intricate. Some of the machines, like the Hell machine, needed up to 17 people to operate it. They also had flying machines because they had to have angels and resurrections and heaven. When they had hell, they called it Hellmouth. Then they would have trap doors and smoke and fire coming from a fire-breathing monster to represent hell. The movable stage was called a pageant wagon, and it moved through the streets while the audience stayed in one place. Our parade floats are representative of these movable pageant wagons. And so sometimes what they would do is each scene would be on a pageant wagon, and so each scene would move to groups of people. So as a performer, you might wind up doing your part of the scene 6 or 7 times. This is an example of a pageant wagon. Notice the wheels and the stairs that load up and move to the next area. And there was usually more than one man. I'm showing only one man, but there was usually more than one man pulling this pageant wagon. And this is just a representation of the pageant wagon. We really don't have very many pictures that show it, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what it looked like. The next stage that I wanted you to see was that fixed stage, the mansion stage. So if you look and see, that one is just, it looks like a pageant wagon, but it doesn't roll. It's built right there in place, and then you have the plateau that's off to one side, and that rolls up to it with stage just to give an additional acting space. The next space that we have show up as an area after the medieval times are the permanent structures that were built in England. As the performers became more commercial and they were performed by professional companies, then we started having a more professional space. Now, we don't actually have the Elizabethan theaters. We have copies of them because they were all built out of wood and most of them were destroyed by fire. But here are the two things that really influenced Western theater. It's that it was a festive theater and that it depicted cosmic drama that touched all people. That is, that universal drama that tried to touch the lives of all the people, from the lowly peasants up to royalty. The Globe Theater was built in 1599. Now I won't ask you years because I'm not interested in that, and you can always go and look that up. And besides that, when you look at different researchers, you're going to come up with 2 or 3 different years either side of 1599. This platform stage was surrounded on 3 sides by an open standing room, and it was backed by a tiering house. The audience was close to the performers, and they used minimal scenery only because people were on 3 sides. And the interesting thing is that peasants were the ones that were in the pit standing and watching the stage, and there was no cover over that part. And then the rich, the middle class, and royalty sat in the tiering house because that structure had a ceiling over it. Oh, we've switched that now. If you want to pay more for a ticket, then you want to sit closer, right? This is a replica of the Globe Theater. Now, in the center, there is not a ceiling there. So when we go and look at the inside, when I show you the inside, then that'll give you an idea of what the Shakespearean audience and how they viewed the stage. If you get the opportunity, Shakespeare in Love, that movie, is a good replication of the Globe Theater. Here's a view of it from the inside. And while this is a replica, you can imagine that if you were a peasant, then this would be an uncomfortable place for you to be in the dead heat of the day, or also when it was raining. The proscenium theater dates from the Italian Renaissance in the early 17th century. Now, the Farnese was built in 1618, and it had this ornamental picture frame, and that's another word for proscenium stage. It's called a picture frame theater, and this is the first time we see a curtain come up so that they can close it and hide the stage as they made the transitions from the audience, because before that there was no curtain, so any kind of moving or set transition that happened always happened in front of the audience. When we get into art, you are going to find that designers develop this innovative painting and scenery moving techniques. One was perspective scenery, and that's when they would paint scenery to look like it was far away. Well, when they did that, they had to bring the actors closer to the audience, because if an actor was next to that scene that they painted, then it would make it look unreal. And the second thing that was very important in the building of proscenium was a wing and groove system for moving the scenery. And there was these little tracks or grooves in the stage, and they had several of them, so you could quickly bring in the background scenery out of the wings, that's the sides of the stage, without having to carry it on and set it up and then prop it up while the audience waited for you to finish setting up for the next scene. The proscenium theater continues to be our most dominant style today. Audiences are intentionally kept at a distance because we want you to be onlookers or witnesses when we do that. When we go into some of the other parts of the stage, we want the audience closer because it gets you more involved in the action. Now, this is a sample I found of a proscenium stage. The seating is called continental seating because there's only aisles on either side. At this time period in the 21st century, you can no longer build an audience like this. There has to be so many seats between each aisle, and that's become a new fire regulation. That's why you see this particular one built like this, but they cannot be built in continental seating anymore. This is the facade I talked about, the proscenium arch. It's that piece that makes the proscenium theater look like a big picture frame or a big television. And also you'll see how the curtains could come in with and hide behind that proscenium as they come in and they go out. Our next stage is called the thrust or the open stage, more called a thrust. And what it does, it wants to minimize the separation of the actor and the audience. The actor performs on a platform that thrusts itself out into the audience. This kind of stage in Dallas, if you get a chance to go see a production there, is Theater 3 in the Quadrangle. They call themselves a theater in the round, but they're really a thrust type of stage because you're only on three sides of the stage. That's the important one for thrust. And this is an example of a thrust stage. This is the Alley Theater, I think, in Chicago. And look how much it brings the audience closer to the action. And you have a small proscenium, but you don't have a lot of backstage area to deal with. Everything you do is out in the open. This is just an audience rendition of the thrust stage, just to show you how close the audience comes versus being in a proscenium type theater. Now the arena theater, or the theater in the round, this is where the audience is seated all the way around the acting area, and the actors make their entrances and exit through the aisles of the audience, and the entrances are referred to as the vom, or the vomitorium, and that comes from the Roman theater, and they said that actors used to be thrown up on the stage, actors and Christians and gladiators. So that's what the aisles are in an arena theater. It's called the vomitorium. And the audience sits on all sides of the stage. This is a little example of an arena theater, and it's just the center part, so very hard to see the audience sitting around. But actually in this particular theater, the floor comes down from the ceiling, so the actors are actually on the set. The floor comes down, they act, and then when the first act or second act, or it ends, then it goes back up into the ceiling of the theater. We used to have a theater in the round in this area in Fort Worth. It was Casa Mañana, but 5 years ago they did some renovations to it, and now it's probably more of a thrust stage. This is an audience rendition of an arena or a theater in the round, and if you look at the aisles, those are the vomitoriums. So you really can't hide, and you always have to be aware that people are watching you all the time. And on top of that, you have to make sure that you are rotating pretty consistently so everybody gets a chance to see your face. I'm showing you another pageant wagon because I wanted to show you the narrow streets that the pageant wagon had to travel down. The European streets were very, very narrow, and plus on top of that, the wagons were small because sometimes the performers would sneak into towns to perform, and they wanted to be able to get into some of these narrow streets where they wouldn't be found out that they were performing. I brought the pageant wagon back because it represents the alley stage, and this is where the audience sits on both sides of the stage. We also in America, and I'm sure in other countries that have beauty pageants, we here refer to it as the Miss America pageant stage. And so that's why all of those pieces that I talk about, from somewhere they come from, and this is where the pageant wagon or the alley stage comes from.